So with no further ado, I will let Professor Asanga get going. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, very much, and very good afternoon to everybody. This is going to be basically a follow-up of the previous presentation by Andrew and also Venerable Dr. Pipo Cho, in which you get a general introduction to the Buddhist picture. In fact, in my discussion, lots of things I will be revisiting the same issues, but the main idea of my presentation is to get your attention to some of what I would like to call meta issues or kind of theoretical issues, little bit of a few philosophical issues associated with that. I think general knowledge-wise, a lot of things were clear in the previous discussion how Buddhism could contribute. But today, in this audience, particularly in this gathering, experts of IHL and also experts of Buddhist philosophy. So I don't consider this to be a ordinary, the after tea kind of discussion, because I see erudite-led monks. So I think if we are really engaging with IHL and also the modern conventions, we need to look at some of the issues a little bit deeper. So let me try to, see whether I can do that. So basically it is international humanitarian law and Buddhism. What is it? I did exactly as was advised. Is that right? Okay. So here I just define IHL, which I don't need to do, but the purpose of international humanitarian law, also known as the law of war or the law of armed conflict, is to minimize suffering during armed conflict by protecting those who do not or no longer participate directly in hostilities, and by regulating the means and methods of warfare. This I got from Professor Peter Harvey's position paper. In Buddhism is the path taught by the Buddha to end suffering. Again, this definition of Buddhism I give because basically I'm not going to go into the historical aspect of Buddhism in this presentation. Of course, in the question and answer session we can go into it, but basically I'm looking at Buddhism as the path taught by the Buddha to end suffering. Now, we have a basic question. Can Buddhism join hands with IHL and work for minimizing suffering in war situations? Now, of course, from our previous presentation, we have been, of course, we accepted this. It is possible. But nevertheless, I would like to raise this question again. Now, the difficulty involved in giving an affirmative answer, saying yes to this question, is the following. The IHL position assumes the existence of war or armed conflict irrespective of the question whether it is justifiable or not. Now I think it is important to first to understand the IHL position. The very moment we are talking about minimizing suffering, of course this very language indicates that suffering is there. The war is there as a reality, and then we are trying to minimize it. Now my question is, from the Buddhist point of view, can we agree with that? On what ground can we agree with this? So, this is basically, you can say, somewhat a theoretical question, but still we need to discuss this issue. Can or does Buddhism accept the possibility of war? What is the Buddhist response to war? Now this comes again, this question, with the sometimes Buddhism is portrayed as completely pacifist, anti-war. There is no possibility of war within Buddhism. So, the Buddhist position is very succinctly, very concisely presented. So, there cannot be war in Buddhism. So if there is no acceptance for war in Buddhism, there is also cannot be a position of war in Buddhism. If at all, the position would be no war. But then the issue is, on the one hand, IHL is talking about minimizing suffering in war. And then we are talking about no war. And I think it is very clear to you these two positions can't go together, right? Because one position is absolute no war, the other position is minimizing. So minimizing suffering, you accept already that there can be suffering is possible, the job is to minimize it. So, this is one basic issue I would like to, for you to think. The historical practice of Buddhism in Buddhist lands shows that the Buddhist rulers were not hesitant to defend their countries and people even by going to war. Then, are these rulers not Buddhist? Should they have refrained from engaging in war at any cost? The answer to this question is linked to the general issue of possibility of using power or force as a means of solving problem. Now, if we take the war language away, now the whole issue is that according to Buddhism, can we use force? Can we use, physical or mental or force against somebody or some group? So the answer we are going to give to this question, can Buddhism use force? It's an important question. Basically, then in a war, sometimes we use the word violence or force. There is no doubt that force is being used. So, is it, approved in Buddhism? Within Buddhism, can we do this? Right? Again, if you go to this, what I would like to call ideal position, like absolutely no war in Buddhism, then of course, you have to say that no force either. You can't use it because, war is also a kind of using force. So this I would consider to be, the important theoretical question we have to consider in this regard. Now, the debate whether Buddhism allows war or using force or power is a result of not making a sufficient distinction between two modes of life and two modes of practice associated with those modes of life, namely the monastic life aiming exclusively at nirvana and the household life aiming at nirvana only as the final goal of a life lived in the samsara, enjoying divine and human happiness. Now, I would like to really make a distinction between these two modes of life. One is the monastic, anagarika, homeless, the life, and the other is agarika, or household, gihi life. So we have gihi or gahatta in Pali language, the household life, and also the anagarika life, where you don't own a house in the sense you are not a part of household life. Now, at the very beginning of discussion, I want to make another comment. Now, of course, around, say after 25 centuries, almost 26 centuries now, Buddhism, particularly the Sangha organization, has evolved to a great length. Now, today, of course, when we talk about even the Buddhist monastic tradition, we are not really referring to those monks who are retiring to forest and trying to meditate all the time, not doing anything else, just directly to attain nirvana. No, I think when I look at the Sangha gathered here, they get decent education, and then they get education in languages. They want to teach the Dhamma. They want to go to countries in the world and propagate Buddhism. So you can see that it is not that they have given up, anybody have given up nirvanic ideal, but simply that ideal is there, but at the same time, you are trying to live a life of compassion, right? So in that life of compassion, you are not 24 hours meditating or something. I mean, in the Tripitaka, in the Buddhist canon, we know that during the time of the Buddha, that was the usual mode of life. You take the Kammatthana, the meditation instruction from the Buddha, and then Buddha says, Aranyagatoa, Rukkhamulagatoa, Sunjagaragatoa, you meditate, and then you attain your ultimate, the goal. And then only if you, then only you go to the society. But so this was the ideal picture. But today, even when I'm referring to the monastic life, of course, it is, I would say, this ideal monastic life. Of course, it doesn't mean that there are no monks practicing this ideal monastic life. Even today, there are. But here we are having this discussion in the context of a university. So we are in a different context. We accept the academic qualifications. So I would like to put this life of yours as a life of compassion, but within of course this world. So helping people while of course you yourself are traveling in the path. So I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. So this is how I would. So therefore, this question I am asking is more like this ideal monastic life. Now, if we do not make a distinction, clear distinction between the two, I think there is going to be a problem. Now, let me go into a little bit deep into it. It is the second mode of life that a larger majority of the followers of the Buddha, householders, including rulers and members of their armies, were prepared to follow. Now, if you look at these householders and the monastic, you can see that monastics are relatively less in number. So, larger majority of the followers of the Buddha are really men and women in the household life. Now, there are some scholars who want to say that this Buddha's teaching to household life is not really very much internal part of Buddhism. Some people say. Of course, this is not a very new idea, it's a whole idea. But I would like to point out to only, one particular point. I think everybody knows that in the very first couple of months of the Buddha's enlightenment, this young householder called Yasa and his 54 friends entered the sasana. Now, if you look at Vinaya, if you read Vinaya, you see that in that story, of course, when Yasa and his friends entered the sasana, Yasa's parents, if he had brothers and sisters, all those people, and also the parents and the family of those 54 friends, we are talking about a large group of people. The Vinaya says that all those lay people started following the Buddha. Now you see this, so the lay life is not something by the way. It has been there from the very beginning. So my claim is that to the lay people, Buddha had to have a path which they could follow. Now on the one hand, it is the lay people, it is on the lay people you depend on for your existence. So they have to go and they have to work and they have to do all kinds of things, earn money and have families and all sorts of things. But at the same time, they have to strive also for their end of suffering. So how are you going to do that? What is the Buddhist path? Now, I think this particular distinction is something of high importance in understanding the Buddhist position correctly. The Buddhist monks and nuns were prohibited from, let alone engaging in war, even talking about kings and their wars. Now, if we take really seriously, Buddhist monks and nuns cannot even talk about war, let alone, do anything else. I think only war, if at all, monks and nuns can talk. In the ideal situation is the war with the Mara, right? So you defeat the Mara and then no any other war you can talk about. So even talking about kings, soldiers, generals, this kind of things are prohibited. Now there is an interesting story in the Vinaya. In the Vinaya, this is Parajika, defeat involving killing a human being. A monk who asked the executioner to kill a victim quickly so that his pain will be minimal was found guilty of violating defeat rule of killing a human being, one of the 4 highest violations. Now I think all the monks gathered here know what the Vinaya rule I am referring to. So when this case was taken to, so the monk happened to be walked by, and then executioner was maybe perhaps known to the monk. So he was just going to do his job. So the monk says, do it as quickly as possible so that this man gets minimum pain. And the incident was reported to the Buddha, and Buddha said, you are guilty of killing a human being. Now, this is a very serious thing. But on the one hand, we know that just asking to executioner to do the job as quickly as possible, you can argue that he is not guilty of parajika, because he didn't ask him to really kill, because he was anyway supposed to be killed. But then monk, what he did was ask him to do it as quick as possible. But in the Vinaya, I think it's a very subtle point. Maybe he used the wrong language. Maybe he just ordered or asked the executioner to kill him. Also for any reason, because this is not the time to do a psychological analysis of the motive behind him. But the case study that comes in the Vinaya clearly says that he was guilty of parajika. Now my point is this. Of course, my conclusion is not negative. Now, if we really go by this ruling, there is a question: even can a monk with upasampada can talk about minimizing suffering in war? Isn't it going to be a problem? Now, I ask you to think about it. But of course, my personal understanding is no, it will not involve. But of course, somebody can. But why I am saying this is really, this position has to be carefully looked at. And then we have to articulate it according to Buddhist philosophy carefully. Because the moment you say, okay, if according to this story, if a monk says that kill as less as possible, then of course you could be guilty. Because it's like, the kill as quick as possible. So according to IHL, a monk says kill as less as possible. You could be guilty. But of course, somebody can interpret this law in that manner. So anyhow, we have, the Vinaya theoretical issue here. But again, as I said earlier, if you take a Buddhist monk today who is getting a decent education and doing a social service, that type of a Buddhist monk, what kind of things he or even Siale, who is getting education, should do, has to be something carefully looked at. So my understanding is, of course, Buddhist monk can get involved in this. But again, what I'm trying to highlight is there are similar cases in the Buddhist tradition. We need to look at them carefully. So my question is, under this ruling, can a monk with higher admission be involved in minimizing suffering in a war situation? Because somebody can argue. But of course, we will see the reasons how the monk will not be guilty for this. But anyhow, let me continue. Contrary to the situation of monks and nuns, it is understood that lay people live a different form of life with different immediate goals. Now, there is samsaric life with punya and papa and akusala, not necessarily with kusala. Now, of course, again, with this group who are experts in Abhidhamma, with Venerable Dr. P. Pocho, I don't need to go into too much details of this, but there is a distinction between, as you know, punya papa and kusala kusala. Now, punya papa are the actions we do normally in order to receive samsaric blessings and in order for make samsaric life happy, full and comfortable. Now, with punya and papa, of course, operate within samsara. You are within samsara, but you are trying to make your samsaric life comfortable. But on the other hand, we have another goal: you get rid of samsara. It's like, suppose we are in a prison. Some of us like to whitewash the prison and decorate it, have flower pots and all these things. But there can be some other people not caring any of these things, just jump off the wall and want to escape. No, it is like this. So the householder's life is like you are decorating and making it as nice as possible within the prison. So their life is punya, and then also they do papa. But if you take kusala, akusala, according to Abhidhamma, you know, kusala means alobha, adosa, amoha. So that you don't have craving, hatred, and delusion. And akusala means lobha, dosa, moha. Now the interesting thing is, if we do not make a distinction between the two, I think the Buddhist layman's life will be very difficult to maintain. Because we know that moment we do even a puja with some kind of attachment, I give a dana to the monk or nun whom I like. So it is punya and also akusala. Because I have my the tanha alone with that. But then can an ordinary person do something 100% kusala? I think this has to be understood when Buddha said that there are 4 different types of actions, karma. Black and black results, or dark results. Dark with white results. White with dark results, and dark and white with white results. I mean, then the understanding is, we as ordinary human beings, all our actions are both mixed. They are both dark and white. We will not be able to, of course, you know, there can be some people whose actions are totally 100% dark, maybe, but very rarely. But even a very bad person, according to Buddhism, is good in some sense. So I think the ordinary person's karma, the action is mixed with dark and white. Kanha, sukha. Now, if we accept that, then of course we are doing a mix things. And ultimately, theoretically speaking, for you to be doing only kusala, as you know, you have to be an arahant, right? Because that is the moment our all lobha, dosa, moha are gone. Now I won't actually, I'm going over this area which are very familiar to you, but still I want to highlight the issue behind here. Because unless we make a distinction between this kusala, akusala and punya, papa, if we don't make this distinction sufficiently, I think there is going to be a serious issue here. Because the point I want to ultimately make is to show that how IHL and Buddhism can go together. But in order to make this distinction, I think we need to make this analysis here. So basically, the samsaric life is punya and papa and also akusala, but not necessarily with kusala. Of course, there can be kusala moments in our life, but of course they are very brief moments. Then again, we fall into this usual category. Now, the Buddhist Jataka literature provides many examples of how Bodhisattva kings ruled righteously, but not totally abstaining from war. Earlier discussion also we looked at this Bodhisattva. Now, Ummaka Jatika, Mahausada Pandita was referred to, and there are many other stories where Bodhisattva played this important role. So you can see that Bodhisattva was trying to dissuade from rulers from the war. But of course, when it came to war, then of course the Bodhisattva instructed how to do that. They engage in the war. So we need to, Bodhisattva kills this person. Okay, according to Paikaushalya Sutra, Bodhisattva kills this person. And then the explanation is this: by killing this one person, of course, I don't necessarily agree with this calculus, but he saved 499 people by killing one person. And also, by killing this person, Bodhisattva saved that person from committing a grave sin which will cause him to be born in the hell for innumerable number of times. So these are the two reasons given. Of course, Bodhisattva being Bodhisattva, he will not incur big damage. So these are the 3 reasons. Anyway, we can debate on this sutra and this story. Even I have some problems. But this shows that something very, very philosophically significant, namely the Buddhist ethical tradition is not absolute, you know, the black or white. Now that is the point. Because if we say that under no circumstances, you can use force or ultimately end up in killing, this whole story is, going to be problematic. But of course, from the Theravada point of view, we can have a critique on the Mahayana. But on the other hand, this whole concept of Upaya Kaushalya, skill in means, this story is given as a Bodhisattva's skill in means. So at least this is one way of looking at if you can save 499 life at the expense of this sounds like socialism, but anyway, the idea has been there. So the point I want to make is this: of course, it sounds very harsh. How can you shoot a person? How can you kill a person? Provided that you have compassion. But I think we need to look at the issue. Of course, you have compassion as the ordinary person. Now, in our Buddhist literature, Bodhisattvas are very interesting because they are neither Arahants, they are neither Buddhas, they are ordinary people. In the Buddhist tradition, venerables, you know that even being a Bodhisattva, only strictly wrong thing that the Bodhisattva did not do was to tell lies. But apart from telling lies, he did all the other things. Occasionally, there are occasions. Oh my God.
Not from the beginning,
Okay. See, when I get worked up, Okay, sorry for that. Raise your hands and say if I'm going too fast. So the whole issue is this Buddhist ethical discourse in which the concept of Upaya Kosala, Upaya Kaushalya, skill in means, is something very challenging. How to really determine, judge our ethical life. What are the dimensions? Do we have completely black and white, clear-cut criteria here? Or should the criteria be adjusted according to the situations? Okay. Now, these are, of course, things we can go on debating. But the point I want to make is, interestingly, there is quite a lot of room within the Buddhist tradition for us to debate, and also to go into theoretical and practical discussions. So now the Buddhist Jataka stories. So we have, we have mixed messages in the Jataka stories, but Jataka stories were the common people's ethical resource in the traditional Buddhist countries, because ordinary people did not go into the discourses. They didn't have the the resources. But it is the Jataka stories the people read. Of course, in the context of Sri Lanka, we had the Jataka book, and today is a full moon poet day. So usually, I remember when I was a very small child, my father used to observe precepts, and then in the evening they get together and recite, they read the Jataka story. So it is the Jataka stories that formed, but in the Jataka stories, who is the Bodhisattva? Bodhisattva is not this perfect person. He is not perfect. He got really upset when he saw beautiful women, and there are things like that. So in the Buddhist tradition, these are not unheard of. Only according to the Theravada tradition, the Bodhisattva did not, again I repeat, he did not tell lies. So if he did something wrong, he would admit it. But he would do wrong things. There were circumstances. So in that sense, the problem is this. Sometimes people attribute a very lofty position to you, and then you nod and you accept it. But then what happens is you can't move. You can't do anything because you have given this thing and you are wearing it now. Now you can't do anything. But what I am asking you to do is look critically the Buddhist tradition. And because particularly today, as I made my remarks in the early morning at the beginning, this is a challenge for Buddhist practitioners. This is a challenge for Buddhist scholars. Now, particularly, if I put it in general terms, this is a new situation. during the time of the Buddha, we did not have IHL. So somebody can say, oh, Buddha did not say anything about it because Buddha did not have IHL. True enough. But that can't be the end of the discussion. Then, of course, there are so many other things which did not exist during the time of the Buddha, but today we have to deal with them. So I think our concern should be not what the Buddha said about this, but what the Buddha would have said about this if he were to live. If he were to live during this time, what the Buddha would say about IHL. Now, try to imagine that. Try to construct that. I think that is going to be our challenge. So Buddhist monks and nuns were prohibited from, oh my God, let me see. Okay. The ideal Buddhist ruler, I think this point came earlier also, but I will just read this. The ideal Buddhist ruler, the universal monarch who is righteous ruler, Dhammiko, Dhammaraja, has his 4 armies, horses, elephants, armed vehicles, and infantry. Although he would not use them, it is clear that this concept retains the idea of power as a requirement of statecraft. Now again, this is very interesting, venerables, because the universal monarch is the ideal Buddhist ruler. He is the righteous ruler. But this righteous ruler would not dismantle his army. He has this 4-fold army, he keeps it. But of course, it is, now in the today's language, this is like a deterrent. So you have the army, but you don't use it. But then why do you have the army if you don't use it? I mean, you spend a couple of money to maintain your army, but why do you have your army if you don't use it? So stories show that, you know, the universal monarch did not use the army, but the important thing is still he maintained the army. Now, other stories say that usually when someone becomes universal monarch, he would go visit from one country to the other with his forces. So, you know, all the rulers accept him very respectfully. Then universal monarch would say, okay, carry on as you used to carry on. It's fine, and he would go to the next one. But problem arises if anybody opposes it. So long as, you know, they allow the universal king to go through, it will not be a problem. But if it is stopped, we don't know what happened, but it is your imagination. When I think about it, I always feel, sometimes, you know, it comes to my mind. Sometime in the Sri Lankan newspapers, I read that Pacific Fleet of United States of America comes for a friendly visit to Colombo. I was always thinking, oh, fine, but suppose Colombo says no, then what will happen? So, anyway, these are realities of life. So, coming to the specific issue of use of power or force in Buddhism, I will give you this Majjhima Nikaya. I think you are familiar with Abhayaraja Kumara Sutta. And the Vinaya story of the 2 misbehaved monks, Assaji and Punabbasu, indicate that use of power with right intention was applicable. Now, actually, the Abhayaraja Kumara Sutta has interesting simile. This prince Buddha was discussing with the Buddha. He had this infant child on his lap. So at some point, the Abhayaraja asked from the Buddha whether he would use harsh language. Of course, it's about the language. Indicated that whether he would use something unpleasant. Then Buddha asked the counter question, Prince, what about if your child gets a fishbone stuck in his throat, what would you do? Would you just let it be, thinking that if you try to take it, it will hurt the child? Or, without thinking about the hurting, you will just take it out? Then the prince says, no, I don't care about the hurt. I will take the child because I love this child. Now Buddha says, Prince, it is the same with me. I do sometimes say unpleasant words, but I have to do that because I love these people. Now you see here, this is something very interesting. Of course, this is not about killing, it is true. But of course, you do something other people don't like. And then the next one is in the Vinaya. Of course, you are familiar. This Assaji and Punabbasu, they were rowdy group of monks, and, you know, they had to be controlled. And then Buddha asked the 2 chief disciples to go and do that. Then they, I think the Venerable Ananda, I'm not sure. Then anyway, said that they are rowdy, how can we go? Then Buddha says, take a crowd. Now, why do you have to take a crowd? Now, you have to kind of unpack these stories. The point I want to make is, again, the using power. The concept is there very much. Okay, sometimes this may hurt your sentiments about Buddhism, which you think that ideal, no, nothing, this is perfectly, the peace. But we have to deal with the ordinary people with lobha, dosa, moha in this world. So, how to deal with that has to be not in a very drastic manner, but you have to have some kind of gradual way to deal with that. So, these two incidents I see in the Buddhist tradition, I would consider to be opening for, the possibilities of, using force, but of course with right intention. It appears that in Buddhism there is not a fully spelled out system of ethics related to war as IHL does. But given that Buddhism accepts the reality of war, it may well concur with the conventions developed by IHL. Now, again, what I'm trying to tell you here is this. As I said earlier also, now there are so many situations today in the world which were not anticipated during the time of the Buddha. But then today, we need to think about them. If I may say something about autobiographical, when I was my first degree in a monastic university in Sri Lanka, I was supposed to write my degree essay. I chose a subject, how Buddhism deals with this kind of problems. So things like environmental pollution, abortion, and things like that. So almost all my professors, most of them are monastic senior monks, they asked, did the Buddha say anything about these things? Were these questions were there during that time? They thought that I was kind of crazy. And birth control, abortion, and these kind of things I discussed, I remember. And they thought that this can't be because Buddha never said anything about these things. Now the position actually, this is about 40 years ago. Now, these things are very much discussed and there are so many volumes of books I have written. But what I wrote in Sinhala, actually I published in 1979, for which I got the state award during that time. They thought it's a good book. But anyhow, I thought there are so many problems today which never Buddha saw that. But ultimately you could see that all these problems can be traced back into certain psychological human conditions and also the social and economic factors. Now all those things are there. True that Buddha did not deal with that. It's the same criterion here. Of course, IHL was not there. But what is the justification of accepting, if IHL is correct, what is the justification of accepting? Now, I think this is something we need to look at the Buddhist philosophy creatively. Now, if we take the ultimate eradication of suffering as the Buddhist goal, and then if we also accept that not everybody in the society can make an end to suffering in an express way or, leaving behind everything. So it has to be gradual. Now, if it is the gradual process, how are we going to do that? Now, gradual process means gradual. You have to live with these realities and gradually, ultimately, you try to create a society where people are not fighting wars. There are still could be problems in the world, but there could be a different world, maybe another 56 years, who knows. We don't need passports to go to countries, and there could be a beautiful world. At least, that is our imagination. There will be people not be, the fighting wars to the boundaries or something. It is possible. But Buddhism believes that it is possible, but it is possible only gradually, not in the very express manner or something. So I think before the Buddhist scholarship, Buddhist practitioners, we have this ever-growing challenge. Because problems are coming every day. New forms of problems are coming every day. But ultimately, you can provide the Buddhist answer to these things if we really study Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist psychology. We have a great psychological tradition, Abhidharma, analysis of mind. Based on these things, you can really provide an answer. But that answer has to be creatively developed. It doesn't come automatically. So here I'm going to refer to two criteria. Now, according to the criterion of great indicators, any statement that agrees with the Dhamma and the Vinaya may be accepted irrespective of its source. Now, this, as you know, this comes in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, which records the last days of the Buddha. There was a very interesting development. Buddha is going to attain parinirvana, pass away. Time is over. Okay. Nobody has said this to me before. Okay, Buddha was in the process of attaining parinirvana. He is passing away. And then there was a question, after the parinirvana, suppose somebody comes and say, okay, I heard this from the Buddha. What are you going to do? Now, if the Buddha was living, you can go and ask and verify it. But Buddha is no more, how are you going to accept? Then Buddha gave a very interesting answer, and it's a philosophical answer. Buddha said that when somebody says something like this, don't accept it, don't reject it. Study it very carefully, and you compare it with the Vinaya, discipline, you compare it with the Dhamma, Sutta, discourses. Those are the two things. So you compare it with Dhamma, the doctrine, philosophy, and practice. And if it agrees with the philosophy and the practice, you accept it. Otherwise, you reject it. So, but if you look at this criterion, it's very interesting because usually the words of a religion are considered to be revelations. I mean, you can't be hanky-panky with that. I mean, okay, it is there, nothing else. But here you see something very interesting. What the Buddha indicates is an idea, the source is not very important. Idea can come from any source. Somebody can come and really say that I heard from the Buddha, but it could be his own creation. But what the Buddha said is, compare it with the Dhamma, compare it with the Vinaya. If it goes along with those things, then accept it, no problem. So, which shows that it is what is important is not the source really. Importance is whether it agrees with the basic teachings of the Buddha. So, I think this is a very powerful thing. Ultimately, the theory behind, or the philosophy behind this coherence theory, when we talk about the truth, we are talking about the truth is what coheres. But, this coherence theory of truth in philosophy is very interesting because coherence theory doesn't say whether something is true or false. What it says is, it coheres with the complete system. So, whether it is true or false, you can really examine separately. But whether it coheres with the complete system of Buddhism, you can really check. So that was the criterion given by the Buddha. And there is also one more statement. Another similar criterion adopted in Buddhism is that everything well said is the word of the Buddha. Sabbang subhasitam tassa bhagavato vachanang eva. I think this comes, I'm sorry I did not put, I think it comes in the Anguttara Nikaya, but has to be understood in the context. So that, again, the idea is that concept of well said, something well said. If something is well said, it is the word of the Buddha. I mean, it could be understood that everything said by the Buddha is well said, or everything well said is the word of the Buddha. I would rather interpret this as the everything well said. Everything well said is the word of the Buddha, in the sense, if you find anything well said by any person, any book, any religion even, you can accept it as the well said, something said by the Buddha. So it's a very generous criterion. I mean, next question is, what does it mean to say something to be well said? Of course, we can say that if anything is conducive to eradication of suffering, human suffering, that is well said. Because ultimate aim of Buddhism is eradication of human suffering. So if anything goes along with the idea of eradication of human suffering, then you accept it as well said. So when you put these two criteria together, what I'm trying to tell you is, look at IHL, the system, and look at what it says, how to minimize suffering. Now, if it meets these criteria, you can accept it as, okay, it is said by the Buddha, or it goes along with what the Buddha said. So, but it has to be examined. It's not like, comes automatically. Again, this is an area where we need to exercise our own logicality, consistency, Dhamma knowledge, and, all these things. But the important point is, within the Buddhist tradition, there is no, in principle, objection for someone to accept anything new. That's no problem at all. You can accept anything new, provided that it meets this kind of criteria. So IHL conventions may be accepted on the ground that may be, okay. And here I am trying to condense quite a lot of things, but I think Andrew and Venerable Pipo Cho went into these things. But what just basically, Buddhism has not developed, as IHL has done, the specific conventions regarding the following in war: care for the wounded, the sick, the protectorless, the distressed, the displaced, the prisoners of war, and the surrendered enemy soldiers, and protection of property, environment, animals, women, children, and so on. Now, while accepting IHL conventions, each of these matters may be supported with reference to the fundamental ethical principles of Buddhism, such as 5 moral principles, Panchasila, 4 sublime states, Metta, Karuna, Mudita, Upeksha, 10 royal virtues, good and bad, Punya, Papa, Kusala, Kusala, and so on. Of course, I don't think I need to go into details of these things. We can see that on the one hand, theoretically, we can say that anything that goes along with the basic philosophy of the Buddha can be accepted. So, that is but apart from that, when you look at, say, for example, Panchasila, you must not steal, you must not kill, these things, and Metta, Karuna, Mudita, Upeksha, the compassion we just discussed. So when all these things put together, how to forge a sensible, just, good life according to these principles in a world which is governed by Lobha, Dosa, Moha. I think that should be the challenge, because the reality of the world is Lobha, Dosa, Moha. Now, if you ask people to get rid of Lobha, Dosa, Moha, then you are making Buddhism completely impractical and unnecessary, and you are pushing Buddhism into some corner which is a relic of the past. No, actually, Buddhism is the lived reality. People are trying to, whole philosophy always has been minimized. I remember reading something about Sri Lankan culture. Now in our culture, the fishing is not really encouraged. So as a result, in that some point of the history, good number of fishing people in the Sinhala community converted to Christianity. Even today, they are, the good Christian community Sri Lanka there. But then interestingly now, it doesn't mean that Buddhists are not fishing. They do, but I read in one of the articles, now it so happens now this man in a village goes for fishing every day to the sea. Now this one house lady, she was, the stressed with problem of rats. So what she did was, she got hold of all these rats and put in a bag and asked this man to take it when he goes fishing into the sea and drop them into the sea. And the man's reaction was, no ma'am, I can't do that. So he refused to do it. The point is this. Of course, on the other hand, he is going to fishing. He is killing as many fish as he can. But on the other hand, he was not ready to kill the rats. So, these are some of the suggestive stories how, though imperfectly, how people in the Buddhist tradition try to be faithful to their tradition. You can say this is rubbish. If you can kill millions of fish, what the heck with the rats? But no, that's not the point. He is fishing because he wants to live. No livelihood. Maybe that's the reason. But he doesn't want to kill rats. So, those are the interesting ways how the lived Buddhist traditions try to incorporate these things. But very often, you can see that when you come to any religion, this happens, with lot of euphoria and, that type of thing, then you look at religion in a somewhat different manner. I see this happening particularly in the Western tradition. You have a time for practicing Buddhism. Okay, 5 to 6 every day I practice Buddhism. Or 7 to 8 in the morning I practice Buddhism. But apart from this 1 hour, of course, the rest of life is, regular life. Practicing time is 1 hour. But I am talking about a society where this practicing Buddhism is a nonsense, where people 24 hours try to, whatever manner they can. So on the one hand, you have somebody trying to practice within 1 hour and then forget about it. Like my wearing the glasses, I can remove it and then I can take it off. But on the other hand, there are societies of people who try to live the tradition, but then the issue is within that lived reality, you have to get everything done. How are you going to do that? So, that is the challenging aspect of this whole, the incorporation we are talking. Okay, so I am not going to go into the details of these things, but of course, you all can develop on these lines and, see how we can look at IHL from Buddhist point of view. Okay, let me summarize. The conclusion may be summarized in the following manner. The monastic position of total dissociation from war cannot be taken as the Buddhist position of war. 2, lay life in Buddhism, one mixed with punya and papa, cannot be totally free from desire, hatred, and delusion. Okay, so we live with these roots of unskillfulness. So the issue is that how a person living with the roots of unskillfulness save himself. In a totally different context, in philosophy of science, I remember Rudolf Carnap, early German philosopher, gives some very interesting simile. He says at some point on philosophy of science, of course, nothing to do with religion. He says, at some point, imagine you to be a sailor sailing in the high sea, but you have to repair your boat. How are you going to repair your boat? Completely dismantle the boat and repair it? You can't do that, right? So what you do is you take plank by plank and you repair it. So finally, whole thing is repaired, but what you have done is not really total dismantling of your boat. This is something like this. We are living a Lobha Dosa Moha life. You can't dismantle the whole thing. So within this, you have to accommodate it. So that's I think, the sensible thing to do. Use of force power with right intention is acceptable to Buddhism. Concurring with IHL for reducing suffering does not contradict either the teaching or the historical practice of Buddhism. Again, you can really come up with counter-examples or argue against these things, but these are open for discussions. Finally, the conventions of IHL for minimizing suffering may be supported with reference to the fundamental ethical principles of Buddhism. So this marks the conclusion. It's open for discussion. Thank you very much for listening. Okay.
So we have some questions, I think, and the first question.
I'm your student. You already know me, Professor.
Thank you very much, Reverend.
When I, very rare chance to meet you in this kind of event. So today we are talking about armed conflicts. Instead of that, I just want you to illustrate about, according to Theravada Vinaya, if a monk attack the attacker for the sake of self-defense, he doesn't violate any disciplinary code.
I see.
So can you explain, can you talk more about, from the legal point of view and philosophical point of view? Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Venerable's question was about the self-defense. If a monk attack a person for self-defense according to Vinaya, he is not violating any Vinaya rule, right? Actually, the self-defense idea, again, I think, Venerable, you can look this from the 2 points of view I mentioned. Suppose you are a practitioner who really wants thinking of nothing worldly, only attain nirvana. Now, such a person can think, no, even at the sacrifice of my life, I will not do anything even minutely wrong, and you can opt for suicide. Now, I don't think that is wrong for a person, it depends on. But again, it becomes not right for a person who want to lead the ordinary life in society with your family, children, and other things, including doing meritorious deeds. So for that type of person, it's not going to be the sensible thing. So according to Buddhist ethics, actually, if you make this distinction I made, I think we can get a fairly clear-cut answer. So for a person with the higher, the noble aspirations, thinking that I will not do anything even at the risk of my life, for such a person, you can say self-defense is useless. I will just let myself be killed. I mean, that's sensible for that person. But I mean, my hesitation is to call that is the Buddhist position. As you said, even the Vinaya allows it. So having said that, in the Japanese Buddhist experience, when they really came up with what's called karate, empty hand, they found a way to really save the Vinaya rule and also save the life. Because, you don't hit anybody, but, you defend only. So, that is another example from the same Buddhist tradition. Thank you.
You mean here you examine 2 levels of life, monastic life and lay life.
Correct.
Yeah, I think even the lay life also, you cannot, we have to look at or examine the intention, Jadana. I think if you just loudly saying that for the lay life is not okay, something like this, just look how to say. I mean, finally, we have to examine the Jadana intention.
Yeah, right.
What do you think, Professor?
No, I do agree with you. I do agree with you, Venerable, because my use in lay and monastic is a kind of 2 broad categories. Even within the lay life, there you can find some people who are really living a very monastic life. It could be, but I was using 2 very broad categories. But ultimately, of course, within the Buddhist tradition, it is the intention why you are forced to. Now, the same principle when you apply for any other serious situations like in conflict or war. Again, you are not going to kill people. But on the other hand, if you are forced to do that, or if there is no escape from that, you have to do that. Something like that. I mean, that is at least how the tradition has understood it. Now, there are historical examples which I don't want to go at this occasion, but if you want to support it, there are historical occasions, historical practices which we can come out with at this for the support of it. Okay, Reverend.
For the legal point of view, if you don't see any evidence, it's okay for you. But yeah.
Well, they are the Reverend. I would not go really according to the modern legal position, because modern legal position may not be necessarily the Vinaya thing. Because modern legal position is, so if there is no evidence, you are not guilty. I mean, if you can't prove it. But within the Buddhist tradition, it doesn't need to be proved, because you did that. Your intention knows it, you did that. So I wouldn't go with the modern legal tradition in this
Thank
case.
you, Professor.
Thank you, Venerable.
Okay. Yes, Professor. Thank you for your very interesting presentation.
Thank you, Reverend.
As you presented, I think you're trying to correspond the Buddha teaching with the IHL. That they
Buddha
are
teaching with what?
that the IHL and Buddhism
right,
is
okay.
correspondent to each other, like that. In my point of view, I think the approach is different from Buddhism and the IHL, because Buddhism trying to solve the problem by the cause, but the IHL is not by the cause but by the problem. So according to Buddhism, the position of Buddhism should be based on the middle way, the middle path. Even when we talk about the compassion, I think the compassion also must be in line with the middle way. If we are too much involved or too restrained, this is not in accordance with the middle way. So compassion also must be balanced with the upekkha. That's why, what is your point of view? I didn't see any point you mentioned about the middle part in tackling the problem.
Actually, this question should have been answered by IHL people because, the whole position is this, Venerable. Now, it's true that I did not talk about that aspect because here we are not trying to solve the problem. It's not to solve the problem of war. IHL is not to solve the problem of war. When war happens, they try to minimize suffering. So this is this dimension, this limit we need to. Of course, according to Buddhist philosophy, ultimately we are not trying to only minimize. Of course, we go further. But in this particular context, because we are dealing with IHL, I mean, they will not say whether this was right or wrong or anything like that. They will really be the third party, impartial, who are trying to make sure that certain the culture, civilization, rules of culture and civilization and humanity are observed so that damage is minimum. Now that is kind of intermediate thing. But if you want to go into the to make it non-existent, then of course, Venerable, I don't have any disagreement with you. We should go into the course and, that sort of thing. Yeah. Andrew, you want to say something?
I don't really want to say anything other than that upekkha, the importance of this also in the context of conflict came out repeatedly in many of the papers that have been presented. So there's something in that. I'm not qualified, of course, to say, but its importance has been realized.
I just want to add one comment in that during the presentation when we were mentioning about compassion, we mentioned this idea of impartiality, and of course the upekkha in the sense that not in the sense of what in generic upekkha. So when we say in Myanmar upekkha pyude, that means we kind of ignore someone because we don't like that someone. But upekkha in the sense of having a balance between karuna and mudita. So when we have karuna, so when we have compassion because of the pain, we also acknowledge that, but we are not shaken by that. And when we also have mudita as well, we also acknowledge that and appreciate that. But at the same time, we're not actually swayed by, the joyous moments and things like that, to the extent that it's overwhelm us. So it's in that sense, what we are talking about is a middle way. Of course, this is kind of theoretical and philosophical, but I think it's within the concept, that it's embedded within the concept. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your wonderful lectures. I'm one of your students. To reduce the conflicts, there are two main possible things: to abolish difference and groups, and number two is to prevent selling and buying dangerous weapons. My question is for number one. Last decade, as you know, in your countries, several happened between army and Tamil rebels. So if our countries to organize only one army group, the situations can be changed into positive ways. in that case, can you suggest Badibakare go patient book, Nilan Adigajare, Nilan Nagushira, no? Paramazo Nilangaro, Maduguayare, Wabo, Lanagan for zero, Chadembo, no? Never do garo. Andre Jimare, Lenadi, Jauna, where are you? Dami Pogo, Digajara Nachabo, Majanagar number 1 about the Majanavan, Panelist, Siaya Nangamavana, bigger Yazuni Doma, you don't say Tibagarevna. Dami, Jaujane, Azuya, that of Shibagare, Domasana. Azuya Daga did the meat the Bongo, a bee than Nenin and Edwa Jamana, Yichangiri, completely your Boagarevna. Agree, Uzino Nangama, Alu. But you go there, Lenagan Positive, no? Chadinam is Soliam, Kaune Alalari, Silana never, I guess I'm about the bureau, CIA, merely go music.
Venerable, thank you very much for the question, but that puts the question into very much into the concrete situations. In fact, actually, I would not mind discussing your question, but if you want to go into the dynamics of things, what is happening at the moment, I think at this juncture of this discussion, it is not a very wise thing to do, because then we have to really, whether it is what is happening in Myanmar or whether it what happened in Sri Lanka, there are all these historical and a lot of dimensions to the question. So giving a very brief answer would not really do. But I mean, having said that, of course, what happened in Sri Lanka is within one context and within a small geographical area. With there are so many factors to be considered. But if we at all go to a absolute position like, okay, annihilation is the only answer, annihilation is the only way to do that, Venerable, I would not approve of that. I would not go to that position, because there can be so many ways of resolving the conflicts. Okay, Sri Lanka had it in one way. Of course, for the moment it appeared to be successful. But on the other hand, there were so many things tried. So my position is, of course, I'm sure Andrew and others are capable of saying things, more sensible things about this. But my position is, we should not go into a one recipe of this, because each recipe is depending on historical and cultural, many factors. So in that sense, what happened in Sri Lanka would not be exactly applicable in other places. Even in what happened in Sri Lanka, end result, the termination of hostilities and war is a good thing. But how it's achieved, whether it is the only way to achieve, whether there are any other ways to achieve, these are some of the broader questions, Venerable, to be asked. So forgive me for not giving yes and no answer to your question. But these questions don't have yes and no answers anyway. Thank you.
Today, all factors and things are mentioned in you all presentation and speaks are very good.
Thank you.
A good example to follow this. But I'd like to know, how can we solve for them? I mean, for them, those who are happening in both sides, M groups or during M complex. So, what is the main message for them to give a good example? Because now we are discussing and questioning. We are making a question and giving an answer. Mm-hmm. It's okay here. But actually, in a particular, at the present day or present time, there are so many M groups and complex here and there. Mm-hmm. So how can we give a good example or message to follow them? Mm-hmm. Please explain.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Venerable. Now, again, I think you will have to comment on this. In fact, now again looking at the IHL position, as I am repeating, this is something in between, trying to get people to be civilized and cultured and humane within this. But that process could bring sanity into these groups. But of course, IHL doesn't seem to be viewing this as their mandate, because there are other organizations. We discuss UNO and, you know, like international organizations, and also if you take any country situations like local organizations, religious organizations, and the doctrines, and, you know, there are so many resources we have got in our society. So I mean, I wouldn't expect everything to happen through IHL, but if IHL is happening, then we make sure that, you know, to a certain extent, these hostilities are taking place within certain parameters, within certain larger principles. So when you are a principled person, when you listen to sanity, I think that could provide the good basis for further solutions. I mean, that is how I look at it.
No, thank you, Professor. I'll add something on this. I think it's true that we have to go beyond just the legal approach, the IHL approach, and that's part of the reason why we're here today, to look at the legal approach, to reinforce it, but also to see how we can enrich it. The ICRC has recently done a study called Roots of Restraint, and you can search for it on the internet, or it's on the ICRC website. It's quite interesting, and basically what it says is, up until now, the ICRC has generally opted what's called an integration approach with promoting IHL, which has been basically to focus on the law, what the law says, and getting this integrated into, you know, whether it's national legislation or the code of conduct of militaries and non-state armed groups. Yeah, so there's a hierarchy, a strict hierarchy, and the law is integrated into that. But this latest study has basically confirmed what we've known in ICRC for a while, that this is not enough, because this is just a legal approach. We actually have to look at this from a moral dimension as well. It's not just about following orders according to IHL. According to IHL, you have individual responsibility not to commit war crimes. So this integration approach has its limits. It also has its limits because, as was mentioned earlier, many armed groups do not have a hierarchy. They're very amorphous. They're very fractured. Yeah, there's no real hierarchy. And they're embedded in communities. And they may not know about IHL, yeah? But what they do know about is their own doctrine. So we try to understand that. And they may be adherents of a religion or a philosophy, or they may be part of a culture which has values which they value, which are part of their identity. Throughout the ages, warriors, fighters, there's been the concept of honor. You fight for your country, you fight for honor, you fight with honor, respecting civilians, using restraint, chivalry. All these are concepts that are very familiar to military people. And so increasingly, we're trying to appeal to this identity, to if there's a Hindu military or a Christian military, what do they value, and how can that reinforce?
Okay, thank you, Andrew. I think that's it.
Any other questions? Okay, gone. Okay, so thank you very much. We'll wind up for today. I will let Dr. P say a few words as well. Basically, the plan is, as far as I understand, to start again at 8 a.m. tomorrow. we have an interactive session in the morning where we'd really like to learn from you, from your experiences, your thoughts. And then we have a couple of presentations from the ICRC, a lighter program before we break just after lunch tomorrow. So thank you so much for your for bearing with us today after 5 days of workshops. we're very, very honoured that you're here and that you're giving us your valuable time. And we look forward to seeing you at 8 a.m. sharp tomorrow morning. Thank you very much.
So I just want to explain a little bit about the brainstorming session that we will have at 8:15 after a few chanting. So this is where the chance for everyone to learn about the kind of the role of monks and nuns and the Sangha, as well as Buddhist communities in the armed conflict areas, and we would actually appreciate your input. So what we will do is we will start with a brainstorming session, and then we will come into group activities so that there will be interactive discussion in small groups, and then we will then report back to the whole audience. So that is our plan. So I won't take up your time now, so thank you very much for participating and discussion. I will let Stefan say.
Thank you. It was just in relation with the discussions tomorrow, just before saying thank you, of course. It's a little bit selfish, but in the discussions tomorrow, I would be really personally interested, maybe it will come out, maybe not so much or not exclusively by the legal and philosophical or ethical questions, the way we have presented them today. I think it was already very rich and we can push it tomorrow one step further. But I was also interested by the practice and by the personal experience of the people who are present in this room in face of war. I'm just giving an example. I am very, very new in Myanmar. I've been here for 1 year and 5 months. But in all the states where I've been, every time I visited people who were victims of the conflict, displaced people, people in the communities, people in the hospital, there was almost every time a monk or a nun around them, or sheltering them in a monastery, or helping them to do something. And I found all those interactions extremely interesting for me to try to understand how do all those people from the Buddhist confession are acting in their day-to-day life. And I think that when they do that, they do not necessarily ask themselves so many questions. They do things in line with their own faith and their own practice. And this is maybe a little bit what I would be curious tomorrow to hear, just to learn more. It is, what is the right attitude in front of so much suffering and so much violence? Is there anything that can come out of those discussions? But of course, if it's not getting out, I will be happy already with the incredible things I heard already today from all of you. And I just want to say thank you personally, but in the name of ICRC as well, for these fascinating discussions that I had the chance to listen to today. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Just one comment, because all the kind of things that we have been discussing, we were mainly talking about the frontline situation, but we have to also take during armed conflict, what are the effects or impact on the community? So, and since you all are community leaders, we would actually appreciate to hear your experience and the way that you have been engaged with these communities. So that would be really grateful. We would be really grateful for that. Okay, thank you very much.